My name is Bill Armstrong, and I'm the CEO at Neversecond. I would like to thank you all for taking some time out of your busy days and evenings to be with us. We're very fortunate today to have Dr. Oscar Jeukendrup, Chief Scientific Officer at Neversecond. We also have, Oscar is also the Head of Performance Nutrition at Team Jumbo-Visma. We also have with us today Ms. Karen Lambrechtse, Performance Chef and Food Coach Coordinator of Team Jumbo-Visma. I'm not sure if Martin will be joining, but we also may be having Martin Redegeld from Jumbo-Visma joining us as well. Martin is the performance nutritionist for the team. Before we get started, I would like to tell you a little briefly about Neversecond. Neversecond was founded in 2020 with the goal of bringing unmatched science-driven performance products to endurance athletes. Unlike many other nutrition brands currently on the market, Neversecond's products are high quality, certified free of banned substances, and safe for use and are science-based. Neversecond's products use precise carbohydrate values and an easy-to-follow guidance system that aims to help athletes fuel more accurately and more consistent and reliable results more than ever before. The key advantages have allowed us to gain the attention of many of top athletes and teams around the world. We are currently the official performance nutrition partner of Team Jumbo-Visma. I think one of the things that makes our relationship with the team so special is that Team Jumbo-Visma is also so fully focused on nutrition, testing, and research as gateways to optimal performance. Today's webinar is entitled Les Forks and Les Tours, Eating to Win at the Tour de France. We would like to first of all thank Oscar and Karen and potentially Martin from Team Jumbo-Visma for this rare opportunity to have one of the winningest teams in the UCI here to provide valuable insights into how they prepare and how they leverage the best nutrition strategies to stay at the front of the peloton so consistently at Grand Tours. The webinar today should last approximately 1 hour. The first portion will consist of questions and answers primarily directed through our team members. In the second half, we'd love to hear from you. Please feel free to enter your questions into the chat at any time. Without further ado, I would like to give you Dr. Oscar Jeukendrup. Oscar, maybe before you, Karen, and potentially Martin take us through the team nutrition strategies, can you perhaps maybe tell the audience a little bit about yourself and how you and Team Jumbo-Visma have embarked on your partnership?
Perfect. Yeah, thank you very much, Bill. Also, Karen, thank you for joining us, for making this possible. And Martin tells me that he's in the car and he will join internet permitting. So, yeah. So my background is mostly in academia, or maybe before that I was a cyclist, so that got me into this in the first place. I spent many years at university doing research and research into the broad area of sports nutrition and metabolism. I also always wanted to make sure that we can translate the science into something practical, because that doesn't always happen. There's a lot of good science that is happening, a lot of universities in the world, but it doesn't always land where it should land with the athletes. And athletes are still, I think when it comes to nutrition, quite confused. They still, even at the highest level, they still make a lot of mistakes that are really unnecessary. So that's something that's always been my mission, to try and help. And this was like long before I joined Bill at Neversecond. I worked with the early version of Jumbo-Visma, and then I was not involved with the team for a little while. But in 2017, And I'm going to just share my screen now to make, if you make me co-host, Bill, then I'll share my screen, and I'll use a few slides to sort of talk about sort of the background of the team. So I started working with the team again in 2017. So hopefully you can see my screen now.
Yes.
So, and I've used your picture here, Karen, and even though in 2017 you were not on the radar, but we did have a part-time chef, one part-time chef in 2017. And this picture down here illustrates that we were working with a company that pre-packaged foods and then send them to the races. And at the races, we would warm up these meals. And at the time, that was fairly sort of groundbreaking. And of course, it's very safe and secure because you know that there's no contaminations and nothing. In 2018, we continued on that model, but now I started to work with some of the riders, actually only 2 of the riders. I had a very big Excel spreadsheet that I used to try and calculate the needs of those 2 riders. And in the Giro, we started to work with those 2 riders and fed them much more targeted. So the amounts were really like portioned and tailored to the individual rider. That was an enormous amount of work, a lot of sort of manual work, a lot of Excel work, and therefore it was not scalable. We could only do it with 2 riders. 2019. So now you see that the team invested in a food truck, and we also used Jumbo prepared an app that replaced my Excel spreadsheet. And we started to weigh the foods. So instead of saying, oh, here's some meals, they are carbohydrate rich, but not knowing exactly how much was in it, we went to a system where we knew exactly what the riders were getting. And also you see that the number of chefs that and nutritionists in the team now went up to 6 in 2019. In 2020, that went even up to 9. The food truck became a little bit bigger. Karen was on board at that point, Martijn was on board at that point, and I was more in the background, much more in the background at that point. 2021, I think the biggest changes there are the changes in the app, plus that the team is actually growing. And 2022, Karen, you could talk more about that. I don't have that on the slide here. So that's a little bit of the sort of the background of how I got working with the team. And what I think we can learn today from Karen is a little bit like what happens in here, and how do we go from this app and the theory to sort of the practical side. Now, sometimes I get the question, well, why don't you just let the riders decide for themselves, because their bodies, they will tell them what they need. And that's not true. It is true in a lot of conditions, and it is true in maybe in races that are not too hard. It is maybe true in some training situation, but in something that is as hard as the Tour de France and as long as the Tour de France, it is definitely not true. And I'm going to show you a historical example here. This is, of course, this goes back 1911, way back. 1911, they didn't really have a clue what they were doing with nutrition. There was no awareness. And look what happens to the weights of these riders. So on average, this group of riders lost 7.1% of their body weight over the course of the Tour de France. So this is what happens when you let the body do the talking. They lose enormous amounts of weight. And we know that if you do that, you lose muscle mass and performance really decreases. So you need to feed the body. There's another study that I want to show you. This was a study, it's an older study, but I think it's still highly relevant. Study published in 1989, but it is a study where in the Tour de France, very accurate measures were performed of energy expenditure. And if you do that over the 21 days, then these are the energy expenditure. I should note that the axis here, the vertical axis starts at 3,000 calories. That's already more than the average person would consume. So even on the rest days, they use more than 3,000 calories. And the question is, can they eat that much? Can they eat that amount of food so that their weight can be maintained during a tour? And what I always did to explain this to students, and many of you may have seen this picture now, is I translated it to a unit that people are more familiar with, and that is cheeseburgers. So if you translate if I go back here, the 9,000 calories that you would see on a really extreme day, if you translate that to cheeseburgers, it would mean a lot of cheeseburgers for breakfast. Then you would have a morning snack, you would have a very large lunch, an afternoon snack, and then dinner is very, very large. And then just before you go to bed, you have a few more. So that's 9,000 calories. And that makes it a little bit more visual what the task is of these riders, who are often, most of them, are very small and very light. In reality, that situation is much worse because they don't have a normal day of breakfast, lunch, and dinner. They are on the bike for 5 hours a day. So that leaves less time to eat. Breakfast is larger. The morning snack and the lunch is really what they would eat on the bike. When they come back, they have a larger amount, dinner, even larger, and then just before going to bed, a little bit more. So you see it's very sort of towards the back end of the day that they consume their calories. So the question is then, in this study, could they take on the energy? And the answer is, overall, the yellow line matches the red line, or the red profile, suggesting that, yes, they do quite well. But if you look in more detail here, if we have 3 hard days in a row, then the second and the third hard day, they can't. There's 1,000 calories in negative energy balance. And even like the day after, they're still in negative energy balance. So it's hard. It's hard to get those calories in. So now I'm going to switch to how the team does this, and then I'm going to ask Karen how this works in the kitchen. So we use this Jumbo food coach, and I'm going to ask you, Karen, in a minute to explain a little bit more what this is. But the planning for the tour starts months in advance. We know what the profile is of the race. We can start to predict what's going to happen on the different stages. We make plans for the different stages, because what we want to get to is a prediction of what is going to happen. And to get to these predictions for the various stages, and those predictions depend, for example, on who's the selection, who's going to ride the tour, because every rider is going to be different. We use historical data. We use the physiology of the rider in these calculations or predictions. We're really looking for expected power output, expected intensities, and that depends on the role of the riders or the goals of the riders. So there's a lot of things that you have to try and get to a very accurate prediction, and knowledge of all these things is therefore important. And that means there's a lot of people involved that need to provide input here: team director, performance director, trainers and coaches, the nutritionist, and so on. So we then come up with predictions. Based on those predictions, we set nutrition targets for carbohydrate, for example, for energy. And this is where the meal planning starts, and where Karen comes in. The app plays a really important role in this, because the app sort of registered what the riders eat on a day, but they also tell the athletes how much they should be eating. So essentially, this is how it works. We have these predictions, we come up with the nutrition targets. The riders will see on their phones in the app what to take for breakfast or how much. They also have a plan for what they will take on the bike. When they finish, they press their bike computers, the information goes into the cloud, and we get the actual data. So we now can work off the actual data, not just the predicted data. And that means that Karen can adjust the evening meals where needed. So sometimes the predictions were a little bit off, they're too low or too high. And this is where the evening meals can be adjusted to make sure that we do feed them enough. So that's the theory. And I think the one thing that I would say before I hand over to Karen really is that it is very easy to come up with a theory, and I think a lot of teams have ideas of how it should be done. A lot of teams have nutritionists that have read all the papers and all the science, and knowing like what should be done is one thing, but actually delivering this to the rider and making sure the rider actually gets the right amounts at the right time, that is the real challenge. So with that, Karen, I'm going to ask you first of all, what's on the menu tonight?
So on the menu tonight, there's actually also a great overview, Oscar, there of how it started, and we are always looking forward how we can make things better. But seeing this overview, it also reminds me like, that's where, you know, all the steps that we already have been taking and still trying to find, fine-tuning things and better meals and progress in the team. On the menu tonight, there's chicken nuggets, there's rice, there's grilled veggies, 2 fresh sauces, there's bread freshly baked, some toppings on the table that they can choose. There's also a special juice that we make that they can drink with their meal, and I think that's it.
But that's really interesting because you got chicken nuggets on there, which is generally perceived as something, that's not something that riders would eat, isn't it?
I know, that doesn't sound like sports nutrition. It is.
Yeah. But it gets to one of the questions I was going to ask you is, like, if we look at the nutrition that we want to give to riders, it is all about, okay, what's in it? What is in this meal? How many grams of carbohydrates? How many grams of protein? But at the end of the day, a rider has to eat. So I guess that's a little bit your challenge. Yeah. Do you start with the targets and then work out how to transform this into food that actually tastes really good? Or
Yeah, it actually starts with those nutritional targets. So what we get from all the data that we collected is 5 meal moments a day, and each meal moment has a macronutrient distribution. And with these numbers, we start composing meals. So maybe where a normal chef would start with, you know, ingredients, tastes, combinations of foods, we start only with carbohydrates, fats, and proteins, and then build from there. And you can actually, the fun thing is, make anything from there. You can choose pasta, rice, bread, you know, to fill up the carbohydrate component. And there's so much variety in the foods. And if you like being creative, then you can combine what you want until you hit those targets. So I think all of our team does this with a lot of love and you know, also with the knowledge that they have as sports nutritionists, because most of our chefs are nutritionists as well. They can really play with these ingredients and then serve the riders a wide variety of foods, of meals that taste different, are different, but still have the same macronutrient components that they need for optimal recovery or pre-race. Putting those targets into real meals is a challenge, but it's fun. I think it's also tasty.
Yeah, and it is the complete opposite way of working of how most chefs would work, because calculating what is in your meals is normally, if it happens at all, it happens in the very, very last step.
Exactly. So, maybe if I can show you, my colleague put the fresh wash here also. But here we have, for example, the recovery meals. So I'm going to try to show you. This here is a cake. It's like a strawberry red velvet cake, and it has the same macronutrients as this meal here, which is like a piadina. I have to bake the bread, but it has meat, some veggies, some mozzarella. So with the same macros, you have 2 complete different meals.
And this is what they will get tonight.
This is for tomorrow, actually.
For tomorrow, yeah.
Recovery meals for tomorrow.
Yeah. So and these recovery meals they get immediately when they get across the finish line, or they get it in the bus. So how does that work? Maybe
in the bus usually. Yes. So when they finish, our riders first they get a recovery shake from Neversecond, and then they have also a cherry juice. Then they go to the bus, and there they have the first recovery meal. And then we also advise them, okay, don't take them all at once, but please take the time to ingest one, and then maybe 1 hour later, take the second one. And then by the time they get to the hotel, there's like time distribution between all the meals for optimal recovery, and then they have their dinner and an evening snack. So it's quite, timed when to get what, because this is also important in the body. Of course, if you take all at once, it cannot really absorb. Of course, it can absorb, but it's not really efficient to get the nutrients where they need to go to replenish the glycogen storage, for example, optimally.
And Cameron, what is the feedback from the riders? Do they like the food, or how do you make sure that they like it?
Use feedback, I guess. We always ask, okay, what do you think? We try all the meals before we hit this grand tour. So they know all the meals, they can give their feedback. And the fun thing also is that once they know how we work, they can also give their own recipes and give their own favorite meals. And we try to, build them into our program. And like that, it's fun to create all the meals like that.
That's great. I saw that Martijn was on here a second ago, but dropped off again, I think. So we'll wait for him to come back on. So who in the team is involved with nutrition? Because you mentioned the bus. Does that mean that the bus driver is involved in nutrition as well?
Yeah, I think it's Martijn here next to me actually. Shall I quickly answer your question? Actually the whole team is involved. We have, of course, the chefs, the nutritionists, you, Oscar, but there's also the bus driver, the soigneurs that are busy with the bottle strategies. There's Marijn Zeeman, everybody's involved, and nutrition is really part of the whole package. So nutrition, mental well-being, training, equipment, it all puts everything together in this puzzle to make, the rider perform at its best. So it's actually really everyone involved in this nutrition plan that we have.
Yeah, very nice. So Martijn, how was your day?
Sorry, I just missed the question.
Sorry, I was asking how was your day, because you just come into the kitchen.
It was a quite eventful day again. Really hard stage for the guys. We had Wout the whole day in the break, and he did the last part of that solo. So yeah, I guess the guys have to eat a lot tonight. Overall, it was an okay day for us.
Yeah, so I've been explaining a little bit how sort of the system works, from making a plan based on sort of predictions that you start with, and then it's sort of you wait till they finish, and then the real data or the real energy they have expended. So if we take Wout for example today, my assumption is that the prediction there is a little bit different than what actually happened.
The original prediction was for sure. Of course, yesterday night we made the final plan for today's stage, and there, of course, it was the plan that he was in the break today. There we already fine-tuned the prediction, and we, for example, increased his predicted power output, but also, for example, his recommended carbohydrate intake on the bike. I just very quickly checked his actual output, and the forecast was still much below his actual values. So I guess he gets a lot of chicken nuggets tonight.
Yeah. So, and I was watching on TV, and I did see that he was very consistently taking his gels today, very, very obviously. So can you talk a little bit about the sort of the nutrition plan for a day like today?
Of course. I think it's good to start with that the nutritional plan during the stage is also or can be individually different. And I think today was a really good example for that, because the other guys who stayed in the bunch had to ride a bit less. So their carbohydrate needs are also a bit less. So what we do is in our prediction, we try to make a prediction for their substrate use and the amount of carbohydrates that they will burn. And with that, we discuss the plan of intake with the riders, so they know at which points in the race they need to finish a bottle or a gel, also where they can grab new ones at other the feeding points. But for example, also the sport directors, they keep reminding the riders from the car, the specific moments that they have to eat or drink something. Some riders also want like a sticker on the handlebars to get also like a visual reminder of when they have to eat or drink. So it depends a bit on every rider how he or have the plan. But in the end, we just need to make sure that every rider is fully aware of what he should eat. And I think that the big thing with that is also doing that in training very, very consistently. So it's like really a habit for the guys to eat and drink on the bike, and then they don't even have to think about it.
Mm-hmm. And can you talk a little bit about, because there's probably people on the call who are not that familiar with Neversecond products. Can you talk a little bit about that, about what products you use mainly, or what products are popular and why?
Yeah, well, I have to say that all the products are very popular. The riders really, really like it. But during the stages, of course, the sports drink. So that's mainly the C30 sports drink, like in normal races, and also the C30 gels, and also the caffeine gels. Those are the products that are used most. And what I really like about those products is of course the scientific background in that. So it's really science based, and that's really like 100% match with the philosophy of the team. Our whole nutrition strategy and also what we do here in the kitchen is purely science based. So the Neversecond products are like a perfect fit with that during the race. What also is really, really useful, especially for the riders, is that all the products have the same composition. So the gels, the drinks, the caffeine gels, everything contains exactly 30 grams of carbohydrates, contains exactly 200 milligrams of sodium, for example. So the riders know their individual targets to get during the race. And because everything is the same, it's really, really easy for them to keep up with what they have taken and what they should take to get to the target. So that makes it really easy for the riders as well. And they also they really like the flavors. It's very, very good for the stomachs, and that we have not a single issue with GI issues. So that are, I think, for me as a nutritionist, but also for the riders, the most important things about the products.
Yeah, obviously, and I think we almost got half an hour, Bill, so we can open up for questions very soon. But I guess the stomach problems is a real issue also usually in stage races, especially sort of in the third week of a tour. How much of that do you see? And
very, very, very rarely. I can't think of a single case that we have had. And I think there are two reasons for that. Like I said, the first one is really high quality products with the best ingredients in it. That is covered with the Neversecond products. Second aspect I also mentioned is the consistent use in training. So probably the best, Oscar, but training the gut really, really makes a difference in that. And that helps also on days like today, where Wout was reaching a really high carbohydrate target, that he, when he arrives in the hotel, I'm sure he doesn't have any GI issues. and he's ready to start his next meal already.
And this sort of brings me sort of full circle, because I started off with some images from Tour de France in 1911, and nutrition has come a very long way. And when I started working in cycling in the 1990s, so also a long time ago, then stomach problems were very common in the third week, and riders were not even taking anywhere close the amounts of carbohydrate that riders take nowadays. Not even 1/3 of what they were taking, and still there were again stomach problems during the ride. So the products they use have improved massively, but also our knowledge of sort of how important it is and how trainable the gut is. And that really needs to be baked into the whole training program. So I think it's come a long way, and I think you're a great example there of putting sort of science into practice, because really, as I said, everyone's got great ideas, but making the great ideas work in the kitchen and on the plates of the riders and in the stomachs of the riders, that's what really matters. So I think with Bill, with that, I'll probably hand over back to you. Maybe you can have a look in the chat or the Q&A and see what people
Absolutely. We have a lot of questions. So, and feel free to keep them coming, folks. We have some great questions in here. We'll start with Travis Hickner, who asks, I'm a college runner. I was wondering if you think these ideas could be applied for running. Love to get your thoughts on that.
I can take that one. It's I think a lot of the ideas are similar, but every athlete, every setting is different, and you have to start with what is the goal? What am I trying to achieve today? So what happens in the kitchen there every day, or behind the computer every day, is the planning based on, okay, what are the goals of this rider? What are they trying to achieve? What are they going to do? And if you have a good understanding of that, you then start to build a nutrition plan with that. And every day that's going to be different. What you have to do to make those goals work is going to be different every day. But the approach, whether you're sort of a college runner or a Tour de France cyclist, the approach can be the same. The solutions are going to be a bit different, for sure.
Fantastic. Thanks, Oscar. Next question we have comes in from Santiago Lopez, who asks, could you all give us another example of a daily menu for a team rider from a typical day?
That's one for the people in the kitchen, I think.
I'll take that one. So a typical day could be like starting the day with an oat porridge, some bread, some toppings. Then they have a pre-race snack in the bus. Then during the race, of course, they eat lots of foods as well, like liquid food, like gels, bars, or pudding broodjes, like little breads. After the race, they have their shake, the other recovery drink, the 2 meals, which could be, yeah, like we said, pasta, and we usually have a savory one and a sweet one. So 2 meals. Then in the evening, it's not always chicken nuggets. We also have like tenderloin or other meat or fish with a carbohydrate source like pasta, rice, or gnocchi. Then some vegetables and a dessert, which could be a cake. Yeah, and that will be it for a day. And that will contain the 9,000 calories. So 9,000.
Yeah.
I think it's good to add that, especially for dinner, we try to have as much as possible variety in the meals.
Yeah.
We are now almost 4 weeks together here. So if we feed them every night, for example, with a delicious pasta, for sure in the end they won't like it as much as they were liking it in the beginning. So especially for those meals, we have a lot of variety, and basically everything you can think of, we try to make it sports nutrition.
Yeah.
So that it also goes from pizza to hamburgers to pasta,
to Mexican,
rice. whatever you can think of. Yeah,
That's great. That's great.
This is actually another big difference with the sort of 1990s, where the every stage at the Tour de France, you just get allocated a hotel. Sometimes it was a good hotel, sometimes, usually it was not so good hotel. Especially certain parts of France, it's very difficult to find hotels. And then the food was always the same, just way overcooked pasta with a red sauce. That was it every day for 21 days. And often a piece of meat that was usually pretty raw. And occasionally a piece of chicken or a piece of fish with that enormous mountain of pasta. So yeah, it's come a long way.
Fantastic. We have another question coming in from Dan, who asks, are there specific micronutrients that need special attention during the tour?
I will take that one. I think the easy part of my job or our job is that when the guys every day consume between 5,000 and 9,000 calories, that it's really easy for them to have all the micronutrients that they need. And I would also say that there is non-specific micronutrient that needs extra attention or that needs extra supplementation, for example. So that's also really our philosophy, that we keep the food first approach, and we really try to give all the micronutrients that they need through the normal foods. Which is, again, really easy if they consume, like today, 7,000-8,000 calories.
Is it safe to say, Martin and Karen and Oscar, that historically a lot of athletes are misdirected to pay a lot of attention to things that are not important, or in other words, like focusing on these small, putting too much attention on the things that are less important from a dietary perspective?
Yeah, I would say so.
Yeah, same. I think we as a team have also been there, 7-8 years ago.
Yeah.
And at that moment we were like, okay, let's get back to the basics, but the basics that can make like 90 or 95% of the difference. And that's really something that we try to teach our riders as well, starting in our development team already, but also the guys here in the tour. And with all the good results and the good feeling that the riders have with it, it's really easy to convince them of that strategy.
So it's I guess the takeaway is keep it simple and focus on eating, and what you're consuming is probably the important part. Focus on consistency. Okay, fantastic.
Yeah, I think it's part of the philosophy is do the really important things, do them really well, and don't waste too much time on sort of the side effects. Yeah.
Okay, fantastic. We have another question in from Johanna, who asks, how do you estimate total energy expenditure in the field to establish the nutritional targets? Do you use any devices per se? And do you calculate energy availability in training or competition period? The most important device in that, I think, is the power meter. So the Garmin's that we use. Like with the numbers coming out of that, it's pretty easy to calculate the energy expenditure on the bike. So we can relatively easy say how much energy they spend on the bike, with some calculations in that, and also some individual characteristics that we take into account. And of course, on top of that, we know quite a lot more about our guys. For example, about their resting metabolism, but also about let's call it the normal daily activities. Here in the Tour de France, that's basically nothing. The guys take the elevator to their rooms, and they just lay on their bed and only move if the dinner is ready. But at home, a lot of guys also have families, have to take the kids from school, walk the dog, whatever. So also those kind of things we try to take into account.
And with saying that, it's also good to remember that we cannot calculate it like for the full 100%. The guys are not robots or not machines. So yeah, it's also really important to keep the human touch in that, to have really frequently discussions with the riders about this aspect, to monitor the body weights, for example. All those things we take into account to come every day a bit closer to their actual energy needs.
Fantastic. Thank you, Martin. One question that came up in the chat, how does the team leverage glucose monitoring?
You want to take that, Asper, or shall I take it?
I can take that.
Okay.
So I think for those people that don't know, you can now get sort of a device, a Super Sapien sensor that you put on your arm, and it measures your glucose, your plasma glucose, or your interstitial glucose minute by minute, and a sensor lasts 2 weeks. So you get an enormous amount of data from just wearing the sensor. And I think the danger there is sometimes over-interpreting that data. So we use it more as a research tool where we investigate very specific situations. It's like, how do riders, for example, respond to a breakfast, and which is the breakfast that is optimal for them leading into an event. That's an example of how we would use it. You can also use the device to look at sort of glucose during the night, which could be like a measure of recovery. And so there's a number of smaller questions that we would ask, and we use the device to get answers to those questions. I wouldn't say that at the moment we can't even in races, because they're not UCI approved. So you can only do this in training situations at the moment. But even if I think if we could use them in races, I don't think that it would be something that we would really would use to guide the riders during a race, for example, or during the day on what to eat. I think it wouldn't change the strategy that we had, but it does help with sort of investigating, okay, what is best for this person, because I think the beauty of tools like this is that it allows you to personalize things a little bit more, because what we do is science-based, but science usually is based on averages of a group of similar subjects. So we collect data in cyclists, for example, and then we draw conclusions and we extrapolate to the cyclists that ride the Tour de France. That's essentially what's happening. But at the same time, we know that not everyone responds exactly the same. So overall, I think with that strategy, you'll do really well. But this is something that maybe you could use to fine tune things a little bit more.
Great, thank you. We have a question from Caroline Kavanagh, who asks, do you check hydration status after rides as a way to confirm fluid intake, for instance, using a refractometer?
We do. Definitely in training, where it's a bit more easy to do this kind of things. So we use the refractometer. We also use body weights for that. We also try to do this every now and then during races, but logistic wise, it's a bit harder there, because when the guys did a stage like today, 220 kilometers, they come at the bus, and they don't always want to be bothered with giving their urine or stepping on the scale. There's tons of media at the bus, so there sometimes is a bit more difficult. But for example, we also monitor this every morning when they wake up to see if there is still anything missing in hydration status. So for sure, we try to keep an eye on it as good as possible, and especially when temperatures increase, of course.
On the heels of that question, Martin, Caroline is also asking, what is the average fluid intake per hour for riders? Is that something that goes into your kind of pre-race predictions in terms of dialing that in, or how do you approach that from fluid intake when you look at stage by stage?
Yeah, so especially from the data that we collected in training situations, we pretty well know how much a rider will lose in terms of fluid at specific intensity and in specific weather conditions. Sweat losses are really dependent on the individual variability and also, of course, on the temperature. But on hot days, when the race is hard, that can easily go up to more than 2 liters per hour that they lose. Of course, the intakes are not always that high because the body is just unable to process that. So we also, of course, have a target for fluid intake on the bike for every rider individually. And with that, a lot of planning also comes with all the soigneurs that we put next to the road with bottles, with the cars that have the bottles. So also, we try to make the bridge to the practice with those kind of things.
Fantastic, thank you. We have another question from Andres Acero, who asks, how do you ensure glycogen store recovery? Can you measure this?
You can measure this. Taking away Oscar.
Yeah, so the same, you can measure it. The gold standard measurement requires you to take a piece of muscle. So it's a surgical procedure, which I don't think Martijn would be doing at the tour, and I don't think he would be very popular if he tried to. But that is unfortunately the gold standard measurement. The second method would be a little bit less invasive, but you need an enormous NMR magnet. So that's just not practical. The third method would be sort of ultrasound, which is a portable device that is claimed to measure muscle glycogen. But my experiences with it have not been that great. And I think the studies with it also don't conclude that this is the most sort of valid measurement. And the reason is that measurement measures probably fluid, and the amount of fluid in the muscle is in many situations related to how much glycogen you have in the muscle, but not in all situations. So sometimes to measure some things, you could use that device. So we have to rely a little bit on the calculations that we do or the predictions that we do of how much glycogen is actually used. And the closer you get with those predictions, the better you can refuel your and refill your glycogen stores. But unfortunately, it's not easy to confirm and to measure.
Thank you, Oscar. We have a question from Paul Booth, which is, I think, comes up consistently as a question from consumers. Have you started to feed riders up to 120 grams per hour during the race? I think that opens up a wider question of how do we look at intake, carbohydrate intake, and how does Neversecond kind of feed into that strategy? I don't know if Oscar, you're probably the best suited to answer that one.
Yeah, so the first question is, like, would you want to go up to 120 grams an hour? That's the first question. And I would answer that with, well, probably yes, if it doesn't cause any problems, then why not? Because the studies seem to suggest the higher you can push carbohydrate intake, the better that will be. But as soon as the carbohydrate intake becomes so high that it starts to cause stomach problems, well, then of course those stomach problems have certainly the potential to reduce your performance. So that is something I would never push it that high. So extremely individual, because I mean, I've worked with individuals where if you try to push up to 60 grams an hour, they struggle, get stomach problems, and they just can't do it. Some people can do 120 grams an hour and have absolutely no problem, and you have everything in between. So with Neversecond, we have sort of based everything on an intake of about 90 grams per hour. Why? Because 90 grams an hour is not so easy to achieve, but it is possible to achieve for the vast majority of people. For some, it may be difficult, but they can work towards it. For some, they may be able to go higher than 90 grams an hour. So I think, yes, some riders in the peloton will definitely be pushing towards 120 grams an hour. There will also be riders in the peloton now that struggle to take in 60 grams an hour. And as Martijn said, it is very trainable. So, but if you don't train it and you just show up and you think, oh, my stomach will be okay, it probably won't be.
Thank you, Oscar. We have probably time for 3 more questions or 4 more questions. And then if any additional questions remain unanswered, we will communicate with whoever's asking the questions. We'll get back to you. And we always also welcome any ongoing questions. You can either direct message us at our Instagram account, and we'll be happy to speak to you directly. Next question is from Sophie Johnson, who asks, do riders have different sodium targets during each day? If so, how do you determine a sodium target? Big question.
I want to answer that one.
Okay.
The reason I put my finger up is that just today I posted 9 blogs on this very topic. Because I think sodium is something that is very sort of misunderstood. There is this enormous belief that electrolytes are the most important thing under the sun, and athletes believe it. But if you actually go to the literature, it's really difficult to find why. And studies don't necessarily show that electrolytes are that important. So that's what this whole series of blogs is about. It's on the website mysportscience.com. I'm also writing a summary of that for Neversecond. So on the Neversecond website, there will also be a shorter version of that explains sort of the background. But the reason why people think sodium is important is, like, first of all, there's this argument, well, if you sweat, you lose sodium, so you have to replace it. Maybe. But I think in the blogs, I show that it's got to be, these losses got to be like really extreme. And it's almost impossible that if any event that is shorter than 4 hours, it's almost impossible for that to become an issue. If it's longer than 4 hours, it's a slightly different story, but then it depends on how much you're sweating. And the strange thing is that if you're sweating more, you're actually at lower risk of lowering your blood sodium. So you don't have to worry as much if you sweat a lot. The biggest risk factor is how much you drink. If you drink a lot and you dilute your sodium in the blood a lot, then you have a small risk of developing hyponatremia. But in reality, this hardly ever happens because it needs to be very prolonged exercise. You need to be replacing like almost 100% of your fluid, which we would never recommend. So yeah, there are very few situations where like you really have to worry about sodium. So what I would do is just have like relatively small amounts of sodium that improve the taste of your product. And that's why we've decided for Neversecond products to have 200 milligrams of sodium in each product. And of course, if you're targeting, say, 90 grams of carbohydrate per hour with 3 gels, you're still getting 600 milligrams of sodium per hour. So it's a decent amount. But especially if, for example, in triathlon, you see people like popping salt tablets like every few minutes, that's definitely not something that I would recommend. It's just not needed. But I'll put the website address in the chat so you can have a look at the series of 9 blogs when you have a free evening.
Thank you, Oscar. Question comes in from Elena Constantine, who asks, tonight's dinner is estimated at how many kilocalories? How do you make sure the riders eat the correct amount? Is this portioned, or do you give the riders some level of liberty with their consumption?
Well, I think like we spoke before about the app that we built. So in their app, they can see what we advise them to take. And we prepared a buffet for them. So there's going to be all the food there with the scales also. So they put their plate on the scale and they weigh what they need. But like Martijn also mentioned, they're humans, not robots. So this is the guideline, this is our advice. And if they feel they need more, they can always take more. And the great thing is also that there's a lot of communication between us and the riders. So they really feel free to also speak about it. So if they need more, they tell us also. So we can, take things into account and maybe also for the next upcoming days, know what they told us and then, make everything really precise for them. So yeah, there's buffet and it's the guideline, but they're still free to take more or less.
Karen, to that point, Marie asks, how long before the tour do you really start working with the riders? I mean, is this something you decide that you start working on the week before, or is it actually long-term planning behind tours?
It's quite long-term planning, I would say. Yeah, so I think as you can remember maybe the slide from Oscar, there's lots of data coming in. And with these nutritional targets, we start 2 months before. I think you put 2 months before these data into the back end of the app that we built, the Food Coach app. And so there we start planning. And it's 5 meals a day. So you can imagine it's lots of, if we want to give them the variety, you also have to think about, okay, how do we want to build this 4 weeks and how do we, put which meal where so that they have their, favorites maybe at the end of the race or certain fruits because they sleep better. All the details are really precisely thought of, also together with other strategies that we might have. So yeah, 2 months before is usually the start that we plan this. And then we have, of course, the riders on altitude camps, training meals or testing meals, taking their feedback into account, putting their favorite recipes into the program. And that all results into where we are today.
Fantastic.
A lot of the strategy for the year, actually, I remember last year we started in November, meeting for this season. We had a meeting to discuss things. So it really starts very early, and the work with a lot of riders is of course just ongoing constantly.
Yeah.
Because a lot of it is about education of the riders, making sure they understand why they're doing things. It's not just telling them, oh, you need to do this. It's also they need to understand why it's important and they need to believe in it for it to be successful.
And also, especially because the team changes, there's new riders also coming to the team, that have completely different experiences or beliefs. And then it's always a really fun process to get to know the rider and see what they need, what they believe, and how we can, put this all together that they all have the same, mind into the strategy and beliefs.
Yeah. We have, we'll go with 2 more questions, and then we know that Karen and Martijn in particular, you have to get on. I'm sure you're probably extremely busy there. So we appreciate your time today. Last 2 questions. Gal asks, hi, why do you give cyclists cherry juice after the stage, not Coca-Cola, Fanta, or other carbonated drinks like some other kids?
We just love cherries. No.
We give the cherry juice first of all because it also contains a lot of carbohydrates, just like the Fanta or the cola or whatever. And I would say that's the most important first step in the recovery process after the finish line. The second ingredient that is can make a difference in their recovery is the high amount of the polyphenols that is in there, and especially the amount of anthocyanin. And there are quite some studies that show that that specific compound can improve muscle recovery. So for example, the muscle soreness will hopefully a little bit less. Of course, I can guarantee that they still have sore muscles after days like today. We